Most philosophers lived quiet lives in their ivory towers, but not this one. Seneca was the richest man in Rome, advisor to emperors, and survived multiple exile attempts. Yet his secret to mastering life wasn't wealth or power. It was something far more surprising. While other philosophers spent their days debating in gardens, Seneca was making and losing fortunes, advising emperors, and fighting for his life in the deadly politics of ancient Rome. Picture this: Rome, 39 AD. A young Seneca stands before Emperor Caligula, one of history's most notorious tyrants. The emperor, jealous of Seneca's brilliant speeches, has just ordered his execution. But instead of begging for his life, Seneca calmly tells Caligula that his chronic illness will probably kill him soon anyway. This wasn't just bravery, it was a calculated move. Caligula, who believed sick people couldn't threaten his power, spared him. This close brush with death taught Seneca something that would transform him from just another ambitious Roman into history's most practical philosopher. During his time as Emperor Nero's advisor, Seneca controlled the equivalent of billions in today's money. He owned vast estates across Italy and even helped create the Roman Empire's monetary policy. But here's what's fascinating. At the height of his wealth and power, he slept on a hard floor and often ate nothing but plain bread. When asked why, he said he was practicing poverty. He believed true power came from being ready to lose everything at any moment. But Seneca wasn't just talking philosophy, he lived it in the most extreme ways. When Nero eventually turned against him, ordering him to commit suicide, Seneca didn't run or beg. Instead, he hosted a dinner party. He spent his final hours comforting his friends and dictating his last thoughts on living well. Even his death became a lesson in mastering life. This wasn't some distant sage giving advice from a safe distance. Seneca navigated the deadliest political plots in Roman history, survived exile to a desert island, lost a massive fortune, made it back again, and advised 2 emperors, all while developing ideas that would change how we think about success, happiness, and power. His secret wasn't just about thinking differently, it was about acting differently in the face of life's biggest challenges. Think modern CEOs are under pressure? Seneca had to manage Emperor Nero's temper tantrums while preventing the collapse of the Roman Empire. Worried about market crashes? Seneca lost the equivalent of $1 billion overnight and had to restart from nothing. Dealing with workplace drama, Seneca had to navigate daily plots, poisonings, and political assassinations. Yet through it all, he discovered something that worked so well. Even today's most successful people are starting to catch on to his ancient wisdom. When Seneca was just starting his career, he faced a death sentence from Emperor Caligula. As he prepared for execution, he discovered something that would change not just his life, but how we view success itself. The story goes deeper than most people know. Seneca wasn't just another victim of Caligula's madness. He had actually caught the emperor's attention because of his incredible speaking skills. His speeches were so good that they made Caligula, who thought of himself as the greatest speaker in Rome, look bad in comparison. But here's where it gets interesting. While in prison awaiting death, Seneca didn't waste time feeling sorry for himself. Instead, he started writing letters to his mother about how to find happiness in the worst situations. These weren't just empty words. He was literally testing his ideas while facing death. One of his guards was so moved by these letters that they got leaked throughout Rome, turning Seneca's crisis into his first big break. After surviving Caligula, Seneca faced an even bigger challenge. He was falsely accused of an affair and exiled to Corsica, a harsh island that was basically the Roman version of Alcatraz. But instead of breaking him, these 8 years of exile turned into his secret weapon. While everyone else saw a ruined man, Seneca used this time to develop the ideas that would later make him the most influential advisor in Rome. The real turning point came when Claudius became emperor after Caligula's assassination. Claudius's new wife remembered Seneca's letters from prison and was impressed by how he handled exile. She convinced Claudius to not only free Seneca, but to make him the tutor of her young son, who just happened to be the future Emperor Nero. Think about that. The same ideas that helped Seneca survive prison and exile were so powerful that they landed him the most important job in the empire. But Seneca wasn't teaching Nero just philosophy. He was teaching him how to handle real power. When Nero became emperor at age 16, everyone expected disaster. Instead, the first 5 years of his reign, guided by Seneca, became known as the 5 Good Years, one of the most peaceful and prosperous periods in Roman history. Seneca had turned his understanding of power and success into practical results that affected millions of lives. This wasn't just ancient history playing out. Seneca was discovering principles about power, success, and happiness that even modern research is just starting to confirm. His time facing death under Caligula, surviving exile, and managing Nero taught him something that most modern self-help books miss completely. Real success isn't about avoiding problems. It's about having a bulletproof system for handling them when they show up. Time to dive into the first major principle Seneca discovered: his shocking view about money and inner wealth. You'd think the richest man in Rome would be obsessed with protecting his fortune, but Seneca did something that would make modern billionaires scratch their heads. Every month he would practice living like a poor person. He'd sleep on the floor, eat the stalest bread, and wear the cheapest clothes. His wealthy friends thought he'd lost his mind, but Seneca was playing a much smarter game. Here's what made this so brilliant. While other rich Romans were constantly terrified of losing their wealth, Seneca had made himself bulletproof to financial disaster. "If you want to know what money really is," he wrote to a friend, "try living without it." But he wasn't just being dramatic. When Emperor Nero eventually seized his fortune, we're talking billions in today's money, Seneca didn't have a meltdown like other wealthy Romans who lost everything. Instead, he shrugged it off and said he'd been practicing for this moment his whole life. But Seneca's view on wealth went even deeper. He noticed something fascinating about the super rich in Rome. The more money they got, the more miserable they became. These people had endless feasts, massive villas, and armies of servants, but they couldn't sleep at night. They were constantly worried about losing it all. Seneca wrote that they were poor in the midst of riches because they never learned the difference between owning wealth and being controlled by it. This is where Seneca's genius really shows up. He figured out that most people get the whole wealth thing backwards. They think money will solve their problems. But Seneca saw that money often just amplifies whatever problems you already have. If you're insecure with a little money, you'll be even more insecure with a lot of it. If you're afraid of losing what you have now, having more won't make that fear go away. It'll make it worse. Think about this. Seneca managed the equivalent of a modern investment fund while serving as Rome's top political advisor. He saw firsthand how wealth affected people at every level of society. He watched people go from rags to riches and back again. His conclusion: the biggest threat to your wealth isn't the market or bad luck. It's your own mind. It is not the man who has too little who is poor, he wrote, but the one who hankers after more. What's wild is that modern research is backing up what Seneca discovered 2,000 years ago. Studies show that after a certain point, about $75,000 per year, more money doesn't make people any happier. Some of today's tech billionaires are catching on to this, living in modest homes, driving regular cars, and focusing on what Seneca called the wealth of the mind. They're realizing what Seneca knew all along, that true wealth isn't about how much money you have, but about your relationship with whatever amount you do have. Seneca's practical test for real wealth was simple, but powerful. He said you're truly wealthy when you can lose all your money and still keep your peace of mind. That's why he kept practicing poverty, even when he was rich. He was building a kind of inner wealth that nobody could take away from him. And when the worst actually happened, when Nero did take everything, Seneca proved his point. He stayed calm, kept writing, and showed that he had something much more valuable than money. He had mastery over his own mind. Let's dive into what Seneca discovered about time, a secret that would make modern productivity experts rethink everything they know. While other Romans were obsessing over managing their money, Seneca realized they were wasting something far more precious. People are frugal in guarding their personal property, he wrote, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy. But here's what makes Seneca's take on time management so fascinating. He wasn't interested in cramming more tasks into each day like modern productivity gurus suggest. Instead, he noticed something that would shock most busy professionals today: the busier Romans claimed to be, the less they actually accomplished. He watched powerful senators rush from meeting to meeting, bragging about their packed schedules, while achieving nothing of real value. Sound familiar? Seneca's big discovery came from watching how the most successful Romans used their time differently. While others filled their days with endless activities, these high achievers focused on what Seneca called time sovereignty, having complete control over your hours. He noticed that true power didn't come from being busy, but from being able to spend time exactly as you chose. The Emperor Augustus, for example, would regularly disappear from Rome to think and plan in complete solitude. He accomplished more in these quiet periods than others did in months of constant activity. What's really interesting is how Seneca tested this idea in his own life. As Nero's advisor, he had one of the busiest jobs in Rome, but instead of working around the clock like other imperial advisors, he would block out specific hours that nobody, not even the emperor, could interrupt. During these periods, he would think, write, and plan. These focused blocks of time let him see solutions that others missed, making him even more valuable to the empire. Here's where Seneca's time management gets really practical. He invented a daily review practice that's more powerful than any modern productivity app. Every evening, he would ask himself 3 questions. What did I do today? What could I have done better? What needs to change tomorrow? But here's the clever part. He wasn't just planning tasks, he was reviewing the quality of his time use. Were his hours spent on things that actually mattered, or was he just keeping busy? The most shocking part of Seneca's time philosophy was his view on leisure. While other Romans saw free time as something to fill with entertainment, Seneca saw it as the most valuable time of all. He said true leisure wasn't about relaxing, but about engaging in activities that made you better. Reading, thinking, having deep conversations. Life is long enough, he wrote, and we've been given enough time to accomplish the highest achievements if our time is used well. But Seneca wasn't just preaching. He put this into practice in a way that would amaze modern executives. When he sensed Nero was starting to turn against him, instead of desperately trying to save his position, he used his remaining time to write books that would influence people for thousands of years. While others wasted their final days in panic, Seneca turned his last moments into his most productive period. He proved that it's not about how much time you have, but how you use whatever time you've got. Let's explore what Seneca discovered about turning adversity into advantage. A strategy so powerful, it helped him survive multiple disasters that would have broken most people. While others saw setbacks as pure bad luck, Seneca discovered they were actually hidden opportunities. But he didn't just theorize about this. He proved it in the most extreme situations possible. Take what happened during his exile to Corsica. Most Roman elites who got exiled either killed themselves or spent years begging to return. Not Seneca. He turned his 8 years on a barren island into a philosophical laboratory. He tested different ways of handling hardship, wrote groundbreaking books, and even studied the island's natural features. When he finally returned to Rome, he wasn't a broken man. He was stronger and smarter than ever. The same experience that destroyed others had turned him into an intellectual powerhouse. But here's where Seneca's approach to adversity gets really interesting. He didn't just wait for bad things to happen. He deliberately practiced handling difficulties. Every month, regardless of how well things were going, he would purposely make his life harder. He'd sleep on the ground, eat the simplest food, and wear basic clothes. His wealthy friends thought this was crazy, but Seneca explained, "If you want to have power over all things, give power over yourself to reason." The most powerful example of this strategy came when Nero ordered him to commit suicide. Instead of panicking like other condemned Romans, Seneca turned his final hours into a masterclass in facing death. He gathered his friends for philosophical discussions, finalized his writings, and even joked about his situation. His calm acceptance of death was so impressive that Nero's soldiers, hardened men who had seen everything, were moved to tears. Even in dying, Seneca was teaching others how to live. This wasn't just ancient philosophy. Seneca was discovering something that modern psychology now calls anti-fragility, the ability to get stronger from stress and setbacks. He realized that comfort and ease, which most people chase, actually make you weaker. Real strength comes from regularly facing and overcoming difficulties. "A gem cannot be polished without friction," he wrote, "nor a person perfected without trials." What's fascinating is how practical Seneca made this approach. He created specific exercises for building mental toughness. For example, he would deliberately expose himself to public embarrassment, then analyze his reactions, or he'd practice losing arguments even when he knew he was right. Each small voluntary hardship was building up his resilience for bigger challenges. It's like he was running a mental gym thousands of years before anyone thought about psychological training. But perhaps Seneca's most brilliant insight about adversity was how he linked it to opportunity. He noticed that times of crisis, when everyone else was losing their heads, were actually the best moments to grow stronger and advance. During Rome's civil wars, while others were paralyzed by fear, Seneca was busy expanding his influence and wealth. He understood that chaos creates opportunities, but only for those who have trained themselves to stay calm and think clearly under pressure. Seneca wasn't alone in discovering these powerful insights about handling life's biggest challenges. In fact, his ideas resonated so deeply across the ancient world that they influenced other great thinkers who faced their own incredible battles. Take Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who led the empire during one of its most challenging periods. While commanding armies on the frontier, Marcus would write in his journal at night, echoing Seneca's principles about facing hardship head-on. But here's what's really fascinating. These weren't just isolated philosophers agreeing with each other. Epictetus, who started life as a slave and ended up becoming one of Rome's most influential teachers, came to the same conclusions from the complete opposite end of society. While Seneca learned his lessons in palaces and senate houses, Epictetus discovered identical truths while wearing chains. Both men, despite their radically different circumstances, found that true power comes from mastering your own mind rather than controlling external events. These ideas were so powerful that they spread far beyond Rome. Ancient Chinese texts, like the Tao Te Ching, talk about similar principles of finding strength through apparent weakness. The ancient Spartans, known for their warrior culture, practiced voluntary hardship just like Seneca suggested. It's like different cultures kept stumbling onto the same deep truths about human nature and success, even though they had no contact with each other. What's mind-blowing is how modern science is now proving these ancient insights were right all along. Researchers studying resilience have found that people who voluntarily expose themselves to controlled stress, exactly what Seneca recommended, become significantly more resistant to anxiety and depression. Studies on successful entrepreneurs show they often share Seneca's attitude toward setbacks, viewing them as opportunities rather than disasters. Even modern military training has independently developed practices that mirror Seneca's teachings. Navy SEALs use a technique they call mental toughness training that's remarkably similar to Seneca's voluntary hardship exercises. Special Forces operators learn to maintain calm under pressure by gradually exposing themselves to increasingly difficult challenges. Exactly the approach Seneca described 2,000 years ago. The business world is catching on too. Silicon Valley executives are now taking digital sabbaticals, basically modern versions of Seneca's voluntary poverty exercises. CEOs of major companies are adopting meditation practices that help them maintain the kind of mental clarity Seneca achieved through his daily reflection routine. It's as if the modern world is finally catching up to what this ancient Roman figured out through hard experience.